They blocked my driveway with 3 HOA trucks, parked sideways like they were guarding the entrance to a fortress. No warning, no knock, just diesel engines and smug faces. The lead guy even sipped a cappuccino while leaning against my mailbox like it belonged to his grandma. When I stepped out onto the porch, still in my flannel shirt and holding coffee, one of them pointed at me like I was the trespasser. "Sorry, sir. Temporary rerouting for neighborhood access upgrades." I looked past him at the 3-ton steel barricades sitting on my gravel drive, then down at the worn path that led from my porch to the road. It was my land. All of it. Not HOA, not county, not federal. Mine. And they were parked on it like I was just supposed to let it happen. I took one sip from my mug, stared at them, then pulled out my phone and typed a single word into the group chat I hadn't used in years. Blocked. They laughed when I went back inside. 15 minutes later, they weren't laughing anymore. I didn't expect a parade when I moved out here 5 years ago. After 2 decades of active duty, I didn't want thanks or ceremonies. Just a little dirt, a little peace, and no one barking orders. The cabin was rough, the power was solar, and the mailbox was duct taped to a fence post I'd borrowed from an old cattle pen. But it was mine. No nosy neighbors, no city rules, just the wind and the birds and my beat-up truck that still backfired on cold starts. That peace lasted exactly until the Whispering Pines HOA decided to expand its jurisdiction. First it was the mailers. Then a woman with an oversmiled clipboard showed up telling me I was being grandfathered in to a community program. I told her I wasn't anyone's grandpa and shut the door. That was 6 months ago. Since then, it was like playing HOA whack-a-mole. New signs, threats of fines, even someone painting a yellow curb near my ditch. I kept photos. Sheriff laughed when I showed him. "City folks out here playing cowboy," he said. "Long as they don't step past your fence, let them wear themselves out." This morning, though, they stepped past the fence. The trucks rolled in before sunrise. Big white ones with bright blue HOA logos slapped on the sides like law enforcement wannabes. One idled near my gate, another blocked my driveway, and a third took the liberty of parking on my side path where I usually walk to the woods. I stood at the window and watched them set up cones. One of them even took out a little folding sign that read, "Official Access Point, Community Safety Redirection." I don't know if they printed that last night, or if they just had a drawer full of ridiculous signs ready to go. I stepped outside as the sky began to lighten. My boots crunched the gravel as I walked up. The man leaning on my mailbox didn't move. Tall, wiry, maybe 45 with sunglasses too big for his face and a self-importance vibe that could fuel a power plant. I cleared my throat. "You're on my land." He didn't even blink. "Good morning, sir. Just a short-term reroute for road work. HOA board approved." "I'm not in the HOA." He gave a little smile like a teacher explaining crayons to a toddler. "We've extended protective access zones. Your property falls under community perimeter." "You mean you made up a line and parked trucks on my drive?" "Sir, this is community business. You'll need to file a non-participation form if you have objections. You parked a truck across my drive." "I object." He nodded like he was doing me a favor by not arresting me. "You'll want to take that up with the board. But today, we're parked." That's when another figure strolled up. Shorter, heavier, gold-rimmed glasses and a blue windbreaker that said, "HOA Director Craig." I'd seen him once before when he threatened to tow my truck because I had parked it facing the wrong orientation on my own land. He folded his arms and stared at me like I was late on rent. "Cole, you had your chance to cooperate. Community is moving forward. We need full perimeter for security." "For what? An alien invasion?" "Community expansion," he said like it was an award. "And you're the only holdout." I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I just turned around, walked back into my cabin, and closed the door. My phone was sitting on the counter. I hadn't texted the group in over a year. The chat was still named Charlie Unit, retired. There were 6 names in it. None of us were regular civilians, not really. You don't go through that much sand and steel and come back clean. But we did our best. I typed one word. Blocked. Then I made eggs. Outside I heard laughter. Someone banged something metal. Craig's voice was barking orders like he thought he was on a mission. I sat at the table, forked up a bite of scrambled eggs, and waited. Somewhere down the road, I imagined tires spinning and radios crackling. I'd sent the word. They'd be coming. Not because I asked for help. Because I gave the signal. 15 minutes later, I heard the first hum of a diesel engine I recognized. It wasn't the kind of sound you mistake for a city vehicle. It was the deep-chested growl of something that had been to hell and back, rebuilt in a buddy's garage, and loaded with custom parts meant for places people weren't supposed to survive. I sipped my coffee. Outside, I could hear Craig yelling. Who the hell are these guys? That was a good question. One I was happy to let them ask face to face. I opened the door and stepped back out just as 3 vehicles rolled up, a black pickup with the old Recon sticker still barely visible on the side, followed by a tan Jeep with mismatched fenders, and then a green beast of a Humvee with no plates and tires the size of furniture. Doors swung open. Out stepped Paula, Danny, and Calvin. Paula had her aviator shades and a notepad already out. Danny was grinning like it was Christmas morning. Calvin just looked disappointed to be awake before noon. They all looked at me. I nodded once. Craig took a step forward. You can't bring strangers into a conflict with community authority. Paula smiled like a rattlesnake. That's funny. I was about to say the same thing to you. The next few minutes would be fun. For me. Not for them. You said? The moment Paula stepped forward with that notepad, the entire tone shifted. It wasn't loud, no shouting, no dramatic music, just a cold and sudden drop in atmosphere. Danny stood beside her, his arms crossed, eyes scanning the trucks like he was assessing enemy armor. Calvin adjusted his baseball cap and pulled a thin folder from under his jacket, the kind of folder that usually made bureaucrats nervous and corrupt HOA leaders sweat through their polos. The HOA guys, who had been chuckling minutes ago, looked like they just realized the ground under their feet wasn't stable. Craig tried to puff himself up, stepping forward with his little clipboard, and said something about trespassing and authorized redirection. Paula didn't even look up from her pad. She calmly asked for names, roles, and the reason each vehicle was parked where it was. When Craig refused, she looked at the sheriff's badge hanging on her belt. It wasn't a current badge, but it didn't need to be. She had served 10 years as a military police captain, and the way she carried herself told you she still had every ounce of authority when she chose to wear it. Craig's face twitched. He tried to say they were operating under HOA statutes, that their bylaws gave them emergency access privileges in designated zones. Calvin opened his folder and pulled out a large laminated map. It was a property line survey, one that clearly showed the driveway, the fence, and the tree line all within Cole's privately owned acreage. No easement, no shared road, just personal land, paid off and recorded with the county. He held up the map, turned it so Craig could see, and asked one question in a dead flat voice. Where exactly do your bylaws overwrite private deeded land in this county? Craig didn't answer. One of the younger HOA guys behind him actually stepped back a pace. The tension was rising, and Cole could feel it in the way the birds had stopped chirping nearby. Danny, now walking around the rear of one of the parked HOA trucks, knelt and examined the back tires. With a low whistle, he called out, They're parked 2 feet over the line. Maybe more. Got flag markers in the grass still. He stood up and brushed his hands on his jeans. Trespassing with industrial vehicles. That's not just rude. That's criminal. One of the HOA volunteers stammered something about not knowing where the property lines were. Danny raised an eyebrow. Then maybe you shouldn't be managing land you don't understand. It didn't take long before the HOA tried to call in outside help. Craig pulled out a phone and dialed someone while walking away from the group. He was speaking fast, using words like urgent and enforcement and civilian interference. It sounded impressive, until a low rumble approached from the north. A county sheriff's cruiser rolled in, lights off, no siren, just steady tires on dirt and a face behind the wheel that made Craig's voice go silent mid-sentence. Sheriff Tom stepped out of the car and adjusted his belt with the slow, deliberate motion of a man who'd seen plenty and wasn't impressed by much anymore. He looked over at Cole, gave a short nod, then turned to the HOA trucks. "Well," he said, "looks like you boys found yourselves in the wrong driveway." Craig sputtered, still holding his phone. "Sheriff, these men are interfering with official HOA functions. We're within our jurisdiction and have board approval." Sheriff Tom walked up, slowly chewing a toothpick. "You have board approval to block a private driveway on deeded land you don't own? That's an interesting new flavor of dumb. You know what this is?" He pointed at the tire tracks in the grass. "That's vehicle trespass. That's unlawful detainment if this man," he gestured to Cole, "couldn't leave his property when he wanted to. That's county-level charges, boys. You really want to escalate this?" Craig tried to protest, but the words didn't have weight anymore. His clipboard looked flimsy in his hands. One of his volunteers, a young man in a branded HOA vest, actually took his vest off quietly and stepped away from the trucks. Paula handed Sheriff Tom a quick summary she had written down. Tom scanned it, then asked to see Calvin's documents. Within minutes they had a clear record of the property lines, the vehicle's positions, and enough witness testimony to make a case. Danny, who had been standing silently, finally spoke. "We can tow the trucks if you like. Got gear in the Humvee. Or," he added with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "they can move them themselves before it gets expensive." Craig clenched his jaw and barked orders at his men to move the vehicles. The engines coughed to life. One of the trucks reversed too sharply and ended up with the back wheel stuck in the soft earth near the edge of the path. The driver tried spinning it, but only dug deeper. Danny watched with amusement. "Told you. Soft shoulder this time of year." He glanced at Cole. "Want me to pull it out?" Cole nodded. "Let's give them a hand." Danny jogged to the Humvee, pulled out a tow cable thicker than most ropes used on ships, and hooked it to the stuck truck like he'd done it 100 times, which he had. In less than a minute, he yanked the vehicle backward with such smooth power that the front wheels actually lifted for a moment before thudding back down. The HOA driver barely had time to hit the brakes before the truck rolled safely onto the gravel. Craig didn't say thank you. He didn't say anything. He just glared at the Humvee like it had personally insulted him. Sheriff Tom clapped his hands once. "Well, I think that concludes today's episode of How Not to Enforce Community Rules. I'll be filing a report. I suggest you all read up on what a real jurisdiction looks like before you try this stunt again." He turned to Cole. "You want to press charges?" Cole looked at the retreating HOA trucks, now heading back toward their neighborhoods with noticeably less swagger. He shook his head. "Not yet. Let's see if they learn anything first." The vehicles pulled away. The cones were gone. The ridiculous sign lay flat in the dirt, forgotten. The road was clear again. Paula folded her notepad and slid it into her back pocket. "That went smoother than I expected." Calvin nodded and gave Cole a little salute. "Good call on the signal." Danny dusted his hands off and smiled wide. "We doing burgers tonight?" Cole looked down the road, still half expecting another truck to try its luck, but the silence had returned. He turned back to his team. "Yeah. Burgers. And maybe we hang that HOA sign over the grill. As a reminder." They all laughed as they walked back toward the cabin, the sun climbing higher behind them. The war was over, for now. But if the HOA came back, they knew exactly who they were dealing with. Ask ChatGPT. Craig wasn't the kind of man to give up easily. Even after the trucks had been moved and his crew had scattered like leaves in the wind, he stood at the far end of the road near his idling SUV, talking furiously into his phone. His sunglasses were off now, clenched in one hand while he waved the other in wide, angry arcs. Cole could see the frustration building with every word he spoke, every failed attempt to spin the situation into something that still gave him control. The sheriff had already driven off, his report secured, his warning clear. But Craig didn't take warnings well. He was one of those people who believed power was something you could cling to just by speaking louder and calling more meetings. Cole watched him pace for a minute, then turned and walked back toward the porch where the others had gathered. Paula was leaning against the railing, scribbling some final notes, while Danny was setting up the grill. Calvin sat on an old bench near the fire pit, sipping something cold and flipping through his legal binder like it was a summer novel. They hadn't come for revenge or payback. They came because the signal had been sent, and that meant one of them was being messed with. That was all it took. They didn't need permission, and they didn't need a reason beyond loyalty. That kind of bond didn't fade with time, not with this group. They had pulled each other out of fires, holes, and worse. A few HOA trucks and a windbreaker weren't going to scare them off. Cole felt a quiet pride settle into his chest as he watched them move. It wasn't just about defending his land. It was about standing for something these HOA types didn't understand. Respect. Ownership. The idea that a man's home is not up for committee vote. The smell of burgers on the grill started to fill the air, mixing with the last bit of tension that still lingered in the dirt like smoke after a burn. Danny flipped the patties with a grin and raised a brow. So, who wants to take bets on how long it takes them to come back with some new paperwork stunt? Calvin didn't look up. They'll try again. Probably something dressed up as a safety inspection or an environmental survey. It won't work, but they'll throw the darts anyway. Paula laughed softly and set her notepad aside. Let them come. We've got more paperwork than they do. And ours actually holds up in court. Cole was about to answer when Craig's SUV suddenly accelerated, kicking up a cloud of dust as it sped down the road. It stopped right in front of Cole's property, tires squealing just enough to feel theatrical. The driver's door flung open, and Craig emerged like a man on a mission. He stormed toward the porch, holding something in his hand, a crumpled letter or form, impossible to tell. You think this is over? He shouted, his voice echoing across the trees. You think just because you called in some buddies that the HOA is gonna back off? We're the governing body of this region. You can't just run your own kingdom out here. Cole stepped down from the porch slowly, calm as ever. Craig, you stepped onto my land, blocked my driveway, and ignored county law. You lost that fight the minute your tires crossed the line. Craig waved the paper like it was sacred scripture. This right here says we have authority to access and maintain perimeter roads. That includes driveways that intersect with community access routes. I had it approved this morning by the emergency committee. Calvin stood up, took 3 steps forward, and held out his hand. Let me see it. Craig hesitated, but shoved the paper toward him. Calvin read through it silently, then raised his eyes. You submitted this today. After the trucks were already here. Backdated it and got 2 other board members to sign. That's not legal. That's desperate. He handed the paper back and turned toward Cole. He just admitted to unauthorized action and tried to cover it post facto. That's report-worthy. Craig's mouth opened and closed without words. He turned to Danny. And what about him? That guy pulled our vehicle with an unauthorized tow rig. That's damage to property. Danny grinned. No damage done. And I've got footage to prove your guy was stuck on private land. Want to see it? He held up a little action cam still clipped to his chest. Craig's face paled. Paula stepped forward then, her voice quiet but firm. Craig, we've got enough to file for a temporary restraining order against you and the HOA if you make one more move like this. You're in over your head, and every step you take just makes it worse. Walk away. Go home. Craig's shoulders sagged just a little. He looked around at the 4 of them. Not yelling. Not threatening. Just standing there like a wall he couldn't climb. Finally, he took a breath, folded the paper, and turned back to his SUV. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just retreat. The vehicle rolled off slower this time, less bluster, more thought. Cole watched until the dust settled again. The peace returned like it had been waiting for the air to clear. The sun had started dipping lower in the sky, casting golden rays through the trees. The group gathered again on the porch, the mood lighter now. Burgers were done, drinks were opened, and the laughter started to replace the earlier tension. Danny hung the flattened HOA sign above the grill with 2 nails and a wink. Trophy wall starting to look good. Calvin toasted it with his drink. Next time they show up with paper, we'll wallpaper the outhouse with it. Paula looked at Cole. So what now? You gonna run for the board and take over the little empire? Cole chuckled and shook his head. Nope. Let them play politics. I just want peace and a clear driveway. He paused, then added, but next time they block it, we go straight to Phase 2. Danny's eyes lit up. Phase 2? You mean the speaker system with the siren and the goats? Cole grinned. Exactly that. They all laughed harder, the kind of laugh that came from shared memories, from absurd missions, from watching the ridiculous collide with the serious, and knowing exactly how to handle both. As the sun dipped below the tree line and the crickets started up in the distance, they sat in the fading light of a quiet victory. The road was clear, the house was safe, and the message was sent. Out here, the land belonged to those who respected it. And no HOA truck, no smug clipboard, no fake emergency order would ever change that. Ask ChatGPT.